And that is how you make psychedelics satanic. Hello, my friends of the Psychedelic Renaissance. It's Tom Hatsis, your psychedelic historian, and this is where witches dance. Before we get started, if you're into this kind of content, please give this video a like and a share, subscribe to the Psychedelic Historian YouTube channel, and make sure you hit that little bell icon so that you're notified every time I post a new video. Also, it'd be great to link up on Instagram. Find me at Psychedelic Historian. On an otherwise peaceful day in 1663, two women found a young girl, Margaretha, in a panicked and desperate state near a strawberry patch. Not knowing what to do, they brought her back to their village to aid her. The records indicate that, for Margaretha, the landscape had started to swirl around, and that she was completely wild and out of her senses. The story they heard goes as follows. Margaretha and three other girls had met in a strawberry patch. One of those girls, Magdalena, had brought with her a kind of bread, which the record only notes as being peculiar. Magdalena had learned the recipe 5 years earlier from a certain Mrs. Hansen. It was Mrs. Hansen who taught Magdalena how to fly to the Heuberg, where it was said witches danced. The Heuberg, or Hay Mountain, is a real mountain in southwestern Germany, and was where some theologians and learned gents believed that witches flew to join in these nocturnal assemblies. Theologian Martin Planch described the Heuberg in this way. Accordingly, this kind of damnable person who tries through witchcraft to change locations calls for the use of dogs or other beasts, pitchforks, or the handles of brooms to ride to the mountain of hay that commoners call the Heuberg, where in playful happiness they celebrate with banquets. One poet living around 1410 tells us of the Heuberg, a supernatural land populated by giants, heroes of myth, and dwarves, where witches flew to join. Other theologians, like Johann Nitter, also commented on the Heuberg. In one of his sermons, probably dating to the 1420s, although we're not exactly sure, Nitter tells the story of a woman who claimed that she could travel to the Heuberg. It is clear that this woman worships the Germanic fertility goddess Hulda, as Nitter calls her an unholden, meaning a worshipper of the goddess Hulda. Nitter was incredulous and asked the woman if he could watch her as she performed this feat. The woman doesn't actually fly to the Heuberg, but instead rubs a magical ointment all over her body and falls into a deep sleep, no doubt due to the soporific medicine plants found in the ointment. And while we will never know exactly what plants were in her ointment, circumstantial evidence would suggest it was things like opium, henbane, mandrake, belladonna, and darnel. If you're interested, I have whole videos on some of those plants, which I'll link in the description box. What's even more interesting is that Nitter retells this story in a later work, Pharmacarius, published in the late 1430s. The woman still uses an ointment, but is only able to fly due to the operations of demons. In just a few short years, we have gone from an ointment that was most likely jam-packed with plant medicines that caused a woman to fly to supernatural congregations to now demons being the real cause. These kinds of supernatural settings on natural landscapes were found in other places in early modern continental Europe. Elsewhere in Germany, a person might fly not to the Heuberg, but to the Brocken, or Broken Mountain. In Italy, witches were said to fly to either Kibili Mountain or to a walnut tree which is located in Benevento. In some instances, a kind of female night spirit called a nocticula was said to oversee the affairs. It's difficult to know if these nocticulae represented some kind of pagan survival of a goddess, or if they were newer creations of medieval Europe, or a combination of both. In any event, John of Salisbury, the 12th century bishop of Chartres Cathedral, wrote that the nocticula would hold nocturnal councils and assemblies at which they feast and revel. Moreover, infants are exposed to lamii, or child-killing demons, and some appear to be cut to pieces and greedily devoured, before by the mercy of their mistress they are restored to their cribs. The idea of slaughtering a child, eating it, and then reviving it comes from an obscure folk belief that might have represented some kind of death rebirth miracle. I mean, we're not really sure. And typically involved eating a farm animal, not a child. The animal would be slaughtered, feasted upon, and then returned to life by a touch of the wand from the Nocticula. We know from trial records of the time that the majority of people who believed in the Nocticula were wise women, village healers, and other kinds of medicine workers. We can therefore see a demonizing veneer put over this folk belief by replacing the farm animal with a slaughtered child to make the rites seem more ghastly than they actually were. This theological rewriting of folk beliefs would intensify by the early 1400s, when theologians would try to erase the Nocticula entirely and replace her with the devil. The nocturnal councils and assemblies at which these people were said to fly to feast and revel served as the foundation for what would later be called the Sabbath. The Sabbath was a theological invention that included things like demonic congregations, murdering children, and worshiping the devil. Now, instead of wise women flying to a mountaintop to meet with a Nocticula, they were flying off to meet Satan. We see such transferences occurring within one of I guess, arguably the most famous anti-witch treatise of the day, the Malleus Maleficarum. Within the Malleus, the ointment was no longer said to contain medical drugs, as earlier writers had noted, but instead the flesh and blood of murdered children. To recap, first the ointments were said to be made out of plant medicines that allowed a person to fly to nocturnal assemblies where they would meet up with a Nocticula or a goddess. Now it was said that the ointment permitted these people to fly to the devil and was in fact not made of plant medicines, but instead with the flesh of murdered children. And that is how you make psychedelics satanic. Which brings us back to our strawberry patch and that peculiar bread that Magdalena had brought. Magdalena had claimed that eating the bread would turn the girls into cows so that they could fly to the Heuberg. Margaretha, as it turns out, had what we today would call a very bad trip.
The bummer, man.
The townsfolk questioned Magdalena about the animal transformations, the strange bread, and the flight to the Heuberg, and Magdalena didn't deny any of it. But perhaps feeling pressure from her interlocutors, Magdalena fled to her home village. Eventually, the authorities showed up and arrested her. It is this second line of questioning that is of interest to us. Now her confession included promises to Satan that she would harm Margaretha. Details she simply didn't mention earlier. My guess is that Magdalena was threatened with torture if she didn't claim otherwise. Inquisitors often use torture in order to make a person's confession conform to theological notions of Satanism. Nonetheless, the authorities listed this as a magical poisoning, and Magdalena was executed for what we today might call psychedelic witchcraft. As for what was really in that bread, I mean, we are likely never going to know. It could have been ergot, the natural precursor for LSD, or opium, or henbane, or mandrake, or whatever. But it was clearly psychoactive in some way. And Magdalena wasn't the only person to suffer such an extreme penalty. Matucha de Francesco, a wise woman living in Todi, Italy around the early 1400s, also seems to have used some kind of plant-based mixture to join these nocturnal assemblies. Only unlike Magdalena, Matucha used a more common form of drug delivery system at the time, an ointment, which we today call flying ointments or witches' ointments. She used the ointment to fly to the walnut tree in Benevento, where she likely met up with a Nocticula. However, her interrogators said that she instead flew to meet the enemy of the human race. In other words, Satan. I'll be doing a whole video on Matucha and her folk magic, so stay tuned for that one. For now, with Matucha, we can see that once again, inquisitors and theologians added the devil to folk practices that didn't involve the devil at all. Well, my friends, that's all I have for you this time, and I'd love to thank you for stopping by. If you found value in this content, please give this video a like and a share, and leave me a comment if you liked it or didn't, or what I could be doing better, because I'd like to see this channel grow and I could use your help in letting me know what I can do better. And until we meet again, I'm Tom Hatsis, your psychedelic historian, reminding you that you free your mind by using your brain. Peace.